Welcome to Season 6 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who believe the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Dr. Gautham Pallapa, who is the founder of Transformity, an organization whose tagline is Transforming Humanity Through Empathy and Technology. He's also the award-winning author of Leading with Empathy, Understanding the Needs of Today's Workforce. You could not have come up with a more important book at this moment in time. Good for you. You're the advisor at VMware. Is that how you pronounce it? VMware, and works with C-suite and executives at Global 2000 enterprises to help them transform their processes, technologies, and culture. His mantra is transform with empathy. Welcome to the show, Gautham.
Thank you for having me, Anita. It's great to be here.
Great to meet you too. I've had the chance to read almost all of it, and I highly recommend it. It is such a zeitgeist type book. And what I think I love most is the way you open your book. It is such an ode to your mom. I know you lost your mom and you were very close to your mom, and the love for your mom is so it's so thread through the entire book. So I just want to acknowledge that because I've really enjoyed reading it from the point of view of like strategy and the importance of leadership, but also because, you know, you've allowed your own vulnerability and soul to kind of show up on those pages. So thanks for that.
Thank you. It's a book on empathy. I have to be vulnerable and set the precedent, right, for everyone to start leading with empathy and also show their authenticity and be vulnerable while they're promoting empathy in this world.
100%. So let's start from the beginning. I understand that in the early part of your career, you worked really hard. You almost came very close to a burnout, and it was a bit of a wake-up call for you. So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I actually come from academia. I've taught for a number of years, and then I, for whatever reason, decided to go into corporate and decided to work in large enterprises. As part of that, as you know, the pace of enterprises is extremely different and it can be very stressful. And early on in my career, I focused a lot on productivity and on delivery rather than on outcomes. And as a result of that, the amount of stress that I was going through, the number of hours that I was working was extremely high. I started focusing on work rather than life, and I had a very, very unhealthy work-life balance. And I almost succumbed to the stress. I had burnouts, and it took me a while, and it actually took me my doctor at that time to tell my GP to tell me, what is the point of working so hard if you can't enjoy life? And so I made it my life's purpose to actually help other people in the workforce and try to reduce the stress there. And my mom, she, as you mentioned, she's been a huge role model for me. I'm extremely lucky to have her as a strong and empathic human and a role model in my life. And so she had a saying, which was, if you have not really done something to improve a human's life in some way, then you have not truly lived. And so that became my calling. And I decided to enter management and then leadership and try to reduce the amount of stress and anxiety that people are going through in this world, find ways in which we can make people feel much more happier. So I joined, I volunteered actually to become a seat at the table and the voice of individual contributors, developers, and engineers in software organizations and service organizations to help reduce the stress and change the way in which we work. And my motto is transform with empathy. And so I take every opportunity to drive awareness of empathy and its value in enterprises that believe predominantly in technology as a way to transform their businesses. But in reality, it's people who are the real value creators, and it's processes that will help them become much more happier.
Right. So you've actually identified empathy as one of the key
I don't know, competencies, skills, phenomenon to help leaders and to help organizations. But let me just backtrack for a second and say, it took COVID to bring that to light, where everyone now understands. Why do you think it took us all so long to figure that out?
COVID was, I want to say, and I'm kind of an optimist. So in the book, I actually do talk about the silver linings that COVID has brought. So this is one of the things that I honestly believe. COVID has been that individual event that has affected almost everyone in the planet in some way, shape, or the form. And I'm pretty sure even on the International Space Station, it's impacted people. So it's not just on the planet, it's the space around us. So almost every industry has been impacted. There's a lot of aftermath there. We moved to preferably contactless, digital-first remote world. We've evolved over the last 2 years, and COVID has been that compelling event to drive all of it. And the reason why it does that, and you're very familiar with it, Anita, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The pandemic impacted our physiological needs, our safety needs, and so our basic needs got shook, and this made us feel extremely uncomfortable. We lost our sense of loving and belonging. We lost our esteem needs, so our psychological needs got impacted, and so all our growth needs went out the window because we were struggling to just exist. And we had shelter in place. People were all working together in the same place. We had video conferences going on for us, maybe our loved ones, our partners, and our children until recently. And our pets were everywhere. And so it wasn't a working from home situation. I call it an existence from home. And that creates a lot of stress and anxiety for an individual. And so everyone starting from an individual contributor or a frontline worker in a company all the way up to leadership and C-suite, they've been impacted in this way. But it doesn't end there. And what I posit is that we haven't had just one pandemic, but in the book I say we have 5. And since the book came out, there's actually one more that has come up. And we have 6 pandemics that are going on at the same time, and that causes a lot of stress. So we have COVID-19 and the pandemic. We have the healthcare inequality, so mental health and wellness, the equity problem of healthcare and not being able to give them that. Then we had the huge racial injustice problem, Black, Asian, Hispanic. That's been on the rise, and that's been very consternating. Privilege and elitism is another thing that has come up that has been really challenging. War, legal status, being male, being white, being politically connected, all those various things. Economic instabilities and the divide between the rich and the poor has increased, unemployment's increased, poverty's increased. Anti-intellectualism is another thing. So anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, conspiracy theorists, deniers, people who question facts and things that we consider as reality. That's been on the uptick. And the thing that has come up since the book was published was the Great Resignation, the Grand Reset, or what I like to call as the Great Introspection. People are focusing. I mean, what's happened is we've evolved. Our priorities have shifted. We're actually focusing on work-life balance, and we're looking at reprioritizing our lives. And so the status quo or the Tayloristic approach that we used to have does not cut it anymore. And that, I think, is an exciting thing. But at the same time, you have low talent attraction and talent retention. And so that's another pandemic. And if you think about it, it is so stressful. All of these impact people at different levels, and it's inevitable that we all will act upon this because it's there. We are going to be affected by at least 2 or 3 of these pandemics at any time.
Yeah. And so in the workplace, we're dealing with people, right? Even though we have processes and strategies and KPIs, at the end of the day, we have to collaborate with one another. And we figured out that now through the last couple of years of sort of blended work or existing work, as you say, at home, that we need to actually recognize the sort of holistic nature of our talent, that they're human beings before they're staffers. So there's that layer that requires empathy among leaders. But then I also think even, this idea of psychological safety in the workplace is so important because we've lived through so much over the last couple of years that we are kind of traumatized at an aggregate level. And people want to feel heard and seen and supported. So what are some of the ways that leaders can lean into their empathy? Well, how can they flex their empathy muscles in this context?
There are a number of things that people can do in order to be more empathic in the workforce. The first thing I always say is a leader has to be authentic. You need to make sure that your say to do ratio is as close to 1 as possible. So anything that you say that you're going to do, you need to follow up and do it. And that's the only way that you can build that trust and rapport within the organization, and also the respect. And if you don't have trust and respect, there is no way that you are going to be considered a leader. You might be a manager with a title, but you actually need people to respect and trust you to be a leader. So that's really important. Helping people and trying to be authentic when you're doing it is really, really important. So I would say that's the first thing that anyone needs to do in order to be an empathic leader. The next thing is to be vulnerable. That is another important thing. Throughout history, we've always had this assumption that, or this kind of notion that a leader has to be militaristic, has to be stoic, and should not show their emotions at all. But at the same time, the definition of a leader is someone who puts themselves up over themselves and focuses on other people and try to help them. And that's a conflicting argument. If you have to help others and you have to really put yourself out there, you need to be vulnerable. And that is something people hesitate to do even today. You need to demonstrate your emotions. It's okay to do that. And especially now, because we've been working from home for a long time, your office and your home are pretty much the same. So there is no actual bifurcation between a personal and a professional life. The minute you opened your video conferencing window in your kitchen, at your kitchen table, you already invited the entire office in, or your entire team in. So I would encourage people to shed that perception that emotions are not responsible, are not having a place in the workplace, and instead be vulnerable. But at the same time, what I would encourage people to do is have vulnerability with boundaries. Just remember that being vulnerable doesn't mean you have your heart on your sleeve and you talk everything to everyone. You still need to be respectful of other people. You want to contain the things that you are sharing and be vulnerable. The third thing is to be approachable. You want to make sure that people can come and approach you. And this is something that I miss being in the office. I was a big proponent of Gemba walks and management by walking around. And I used to have immense conversations interacting with my teams, and I learned so much from it. And you get a lot of dopamine and oxytocin when you actually interact with people. That's great. So, but now, since we don't have, a lot of companies don't have that opportunity, there are ways in which you can do, like have skip levels, have ask me anything, open town halls. We just had a lean coffee today where I invited my entire teams and said, let's talk about any topic. It's fine. It's what is at top of mind for you. So be approachable that way. The fourth thing is to be attentive. When someone comes to you and they want to talk to you, they are actually being extremely courageous. It takes a lot of effort for someone to come and ask for help. So when they're coming, you need to be respectful of that, and you need to focus and be attentive to them. I've seen a lot of people trying to multitask when we as humans actually are really bad at multitasking, but it just means that they're not giving the right amount of container for people to feel safe and to express themselves and express their and feel their emotions to the fullest. So you need to be attentive on that. The fifth one is to be appreciative. You always want to praise in public, and you want to give feedback in private. And then you want to evaluate outlier behavior with empathy. And you want to see, is there something wrong that's going on if there's an outlier behavior? And then the sixth thing, and this is really something I'm very passionate about, is to be connected. You need to constantly keep looking for signs of overwork or burnout in the workforce. You want to focus on reducing the manual toil and allow systems to actually perform those mundane tasks and allow people to focus on high value activities. And that makes them much more happier, that allows them to feel much more fulfilled. So these are some really these are 6 simple ways by which you can become an empathic leader in the workforce.
And they all speak to, I think, emotional intelligence. They all speak to, it's not about strategy. It's not about execution. It's not about, the science. It's about the humanity of leadership. That's what I take away from that.
Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies.
I was very interested to read about 3 different kinds of cultures. I wonder whether or not you know which one I'm talking about, because I can find it on page 266, I think, where one of them is generative work cultures and why that's the best one. And, how can an organization be one? Could you speak to those?
Sure. And this comes from Dr. Ron Westrom, who talked about the typology of organizations. There are 3 types of organizations that he identified. The first one is pathological. And pathological is where it's very power-oriented. There's very low cooperation. The messengers of bad news are pretty much shot. The responsibilities are avoided because if they are responsible for it, then they're accountable, which means that if something goes south, then their heads will roll. One throat to choke is usually the normal phrase that is used in these kinds of organizations. Collaboration is extremely discouraged. And if there is failure, it's scapegoating. They're going to use you as an example. It's like in the olden days during war when they used to put the head on the pike to warn off people. That's a pathological organization, and any kind of novelty is crushed. It's a very, very toxic environment to be in. The next one is bureaucratic, which is very rule-oriented. So you have a playbook for almost everything. You have a decent amount of cooperation. The messengers are probably neglected. So if there is bad news, then they either are sidelined or they say, yeah, we understand it, but that's okay. The responsibilities are taken on an opportunistic way. So if you can climb up the corporate ladder or there is some political gains for it, then you probably will embrace that responsibility. Failure is justice, so they will bring swift justice upon you. And if there are novelties or if you're trying to be innovative, then it does cause some problems. But the natural transition is as you are trying to improve your organization, you move from pathological to bureaucratic because you're putting all those manual overheads and rules in order to make things better. So that's the next progression. And the third one, and this is where organizations really want to be in, is generative. So it's performance oriented. You have extremely high cooperation. Your messengers are trained. You have shared risks. Everyone pitches in. They focus on business outcomes and business values rather than projects and deadlines and siloed approaches. Collaboration is extremely encouraged here. If there is failure, then there is inquiry and there is learning because they've learned to celebrate failure and embrace failure. And then any novelty is utilized. And it's in this place where there's a high level of trust and respect. There's team bonding. There's open communication and transparency. There's a lot of psychological safety because failure is accepted. And because there is a lot of psychological safety, people take more risks and they experiment. They're comfortable with the failures, and so they are more innovative. They break all the silos. They have a learning culture, and that creates that positive or the generative culture, and people become happy as a result of it. And that's usually the place where you want people to be because that is empathic, that is very psychologically safe. There's a lot of innovation. It's a wonderful place to be. And that's what organizations need to strive to.
Great. Well, thank you for describing those so succinctly. Now, you've spent a lot of time working in technology. I mean, that's your current work, right? I wonder, I'm not the first person to use technology. Okay. So I have sort of reservations around technology, although if it's made user-friendly, then I kind of jump on board. But I also kind of wonder, generally speaking, all this technology, is it really helping the quality of our lives, and sort of where's technology going? So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how empathy weaves itself into the work you do with technology.
Sure. There's a whole school that, especially in design thinking, that focuses on customer empathy and empathy mapping, and how you need to relate yourself more to the persona of the user and how they're using it. But for me, the fundamental question, and I've led product teams as well for a number of years, and the first question that I ask them is, what is the point of the technology? What are we trying to do? Because technology by itself does not generate value. What it does is it's an enabler. It only accelerates outcomes and accelerates to what you want to do. So bad technology makes you feel terrible quicker. But that's all it does. And good technology really immerses you and makes you enjoy. So the first question that I always ask is, why? Why does this technology exist? What is the purpose? How does this improve the quality of life of a human? And I think when we start from there, that's actually the point of empathy. That is, we are trying to do something tangible to improve the pain that someone else is feeling. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, when they focus on a problem, the ones that really work out are the technologies that try to address a pain point that a customer is having. So it's all based upon empathy. So we start over there. And then the next thing is, what does the user consider high value activity that they are actually enjoying and they're having fun with? And what must the system do by itself? So as part of my PhD, I was talking with you initially, right? So I've focused on smart homes and in assisted healthcare facilities, where we were using technology and algorithms to improve the quality of life of patients suffering from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So in these kinds of situations, if the technology or the algorithms that I'm introducing is not improving the quality of life of a human, then should they exist? We don't want to disrupt just for the sake of disruption. We want to have strategic disruption, because that's what leads to progress. And again, that's a very humanistic approach to introducing technology. Reduce the amount of friction and manual intervention and toil that the technology is introducing, and you will have amazing technology that will delight the customer.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also something to be said about empathy for the workforce in technology. I had a conversation not too long ago with Andrea Goulet, who works, who was a late bloomer to coding, but now is kind of in the coding. She does a lot of, I think it's called legacy coding. And she said that the origin story of software coding was very toxic as an environment, where people were shaming each other and it was just abusive. And so she's trying to make the case that not only do we need empathy in technology, and we have to be careful that as we code technology, that we don't perpetuate some of the ills that we have in day-to-day society, such as, sexist orientation or racism in AI or all of that, or ableism. But she's saying that even the workforce itself stands to benefit from, breathing a little more empathy into the space, so that everybody can take risks without fearing that their jobs are on the line or that their egos are going to be shredded in that, what was that first category of businesses that you described? Pathological. Yeah. Moving out of the pathological and even moving out of the, the bureaucratic, that there's a real benefit to moving upstream.
Yeah, definitely. So workforce empathy is a huge passion of mine, right? And we've been talking about it a little bit. But then there are a couple of other things. It's not just saying you're empathic or trying to demonstrate cognitive empathy or maybe emotional empathy, but it's what else can you do? So we need to empower the people so that you enable them and make them feel that they actually are in control of their destiny, and they are able to achieve the outcomes that they're supposed to do. The next one is to increase the engagement. You want to have that open communication with people and improve what I call the signal to noise ratio. We have a lot of noise. We have a lot of chatter going on, but the essence of what is being communicated needs to improve. You need to provide clear understanding of why the team exists, what is the purpose, what are the business outcomes, and once you articulate the why or the purpose, you need to entrust them to go and achieve that. And you'd never want to second guess their how. And that's something that I've seen with a lot of, with some of the enterprises where leaders, they feel extremely nervous because these are really large corporate make or break kind of initiatives, where, especially when they're on a digital transformation path. And so, these may be pathological or bureaucratic organizations, and so there is that single throat to choke with that leader. So the leader feels extremely nervous, and so they want to invest themselves more and be closer to the front line, so to speak. But then, because they've grown up through the ranks and they know the systems well, they start questioning how the team's approaching it. Oh, why are you doing it in this way? We used to do it in a different way. That friction of agile versus waterfall starts up, or DevOps or lean, and all these various approaches that have that paradigm shift that gets impacted because people are questioning the team's how. What a leader needs to do is entrust them and then equip them. You need to give them the tools to be successful. You need to help them accomplish and do things that they want to do, but at a sustainable pace. That is the thing that a lot of people fail. They provide everything possible. They probably entrust them, they engage them, they maybe empower them, but then they have unrealistic deadlines, or they expect them to work weekends and nights and all these things, and that's not acceptable. One of the things that I had mandated with teams in one of my roles was nobody was allowed to work overtimes or on weekends without my approval. And the directors had to come and justify why they needed these people to work overtime. And that helped us actually improve the collaboration, the enablement, the empowering the teams, and then entrusting them. Because you don't want to work that much, and you really need to help them be themselves, provide that safe space in the container, and allow them to just innovate, and beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the early question of the conversation where it's like you lived your own at the brink of stress and overwhelm and burnout to recognize this is not a way to live. And so you want to empower people, and you're empathizing with them that you want them to have a better kind of work-life balance too. I'm going to ask a last question, which is always my concluding question of the interview, but I'll just take a second just to hold this up so everybody can see. Leaders leading with empathy, understanding the needs of today's workforce. Terrific book, especially for nowadays. And you talk a lot about hybrid working and coming back and what that's going to mean for the future of work. So check it out. So my last question is, if you can think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
That's a hard but intriguing question. Okay, so and this is a ways back. So through some unforeseen circumstances, my graduation got delayed by a few months. And since I was a non-resident immigrant in the US, I had to find a job within 90 days or I had to leave the country. And it was me and my wife, and we both had to leave the country. It was 2009, and that was probably the worst time to graduate, but there was no going back. I'd already filed for my graduation. I'd interviewed for a couple of places and were waiting for someone to get back to me. But as you can imagine, there were a lot of experienced people in the market, and the competition was high. And in the meantime, time was ticking, and I was getting anxious. And because I filed for graduation already, I couldn't work at the university. I didn't have an income. My wife was a student-dependent visa, and so she couldn't work either. So we were pretty much living on credit cards and eking out a living until I could get a job. And needless to say, it was a very, very stressful time. A friend of mine at that time, he was also a student. He learned about my predicament and really empathized with me. And even though he was going through some rough times himself, for whatever reason, he took it upon himself to become a compassionate empath and do something about my pain. He was supposed to join an internship with someone he knew, but he went and talked to that person and convinced that person to give me the job for a while so that I could maintain my status in the US. I mean, he gave up his internship so that I could stay. In my book, I actually talk about a shockingly apathetic response that one of the recruiters gave to me when I shared my predicament with her, and this was during the same time frame. But this guy went above and beyond. He connected with my pain at such a deeply emotional level and gave up something valuable to him just so that he could perform an action to improve my condition. And so I'm extremely grateful to that person and for what he did. And that's one example of purposeful empathy that I can think of that has been so impactful to me. And I'm very touched by that in so many ways.
Shout out to the buddy. Are you guys still friends, I hope?
Yeah. Pretty close.
You still pick up the tab when you go out for a beer?
He's not in the same country, but if I would meet him, definitely I would.
Nice. Great. Well, it was so wonderful to meet you. Good luck with this book. It was a great read, as I said, and I want to thank everybody for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever's holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.